Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So I'm downstairs today again. I'm kind of liking this setup a little bit because the lighting seems to be nicer. We're starting to have cooler weather here in Southern California. It actually rained last night and it's been sort of cloudy and the clouds kind of come and go, and so I noticed the lighting upstairs was a little bit weird, like it's like dark, and here I can sort of almost control the lighting a little bit better here in my room. But today, that's obviously not the topic of the video today. I did do another book review. It's not a book review. It's kind of like a discussion on Selma Blair's book, Mean Baby. I did read another book. I actually read this one before that book, and I kind of was debating whether to even discuss this book because it's not, well, technically, I guess when we think of chronic illness, we think of things like MS, Lyme disease, any type of autoimmune illness, lupus, that kind of thing. We don't always seem to classify like an eating disorder or a mental illness, which eating disorders do fall under that, umbrella of mental illness. We don't always tend to consider those chronic conditions, even though they are. A mental illness is something that you typically have your whole life, or at least most of your life, and that you struggle with. I know a lot of people with mental health issues that struggle to find the right treatment, or combination of treatments that will help them. Conditions like ADHD, my ex-husband had ADHD, and it was a struggle because he had to find the right medication, the right type of therapy, and it's really hard. And a lot of people with these conditions sometimes lose their health and their life to them. One of the most I guess prominent celebrities that I can think of right now is I forgot her name, Princess Leia. She played Princess Leia, and she lost her battle with, well, I hate saying lost her battle, but she had bipolar disorder, and she died actually a few years ago. I'm filming this in November. She died, I think, on Christmas or around Christmas, I think a couple years ago. And so we tend to not look at these conditions the same way we do with something like, fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue, but they are chronic conditions that follow you for a very, very long time. And so this book, it's called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I did not know who Jennette McCurdy was. I am not of that generation. That's more like my sister's generation. She was, I think, on iCarly or something. She was on Disney Channel on a show. I think she also had her own spin-off show. So I got to know who she was through this book. But she, by the way, if you are not comfortable with eating disorders or discussions of eating disorders, vomiting, things like that, this might not be the video for you. I myself am emetophobic. I don't like these kinds of things. But I really wanted to read this book. I thought that it was probably very interesting, and, I've kind of gone through some similar things. And so I really, I powered through it, to tell you the honest truth. But if that kind of stuff bothers you, I wouldn't recommend this book to you, and I definitely probably would not watch this video. But she struggled with bulimia, anorexia, and she was pretty abused as a child. And, I say pretty abused, she was very abused, and she did not see it as abuse. But like I said, I'm not going to review this book. I kind of want to have a discussion on it because, much like the book by Selma Blair, I saw some parallels with my own life. And there were things that came up as I was reading the book that really made me think about my illness, made me think about, my entire life and certain aspects of my life that have affected me quite a bit. So, the book is really good. I do recommend it. Like I said, unless you're very, very sensitive to these kinds of things, then, I would either brace myself, if you're going to read this book, or if you're very sensitive to it, I probably would pass. But I got through it, and it is humorous. And obviously the title kind of implies sort of like a kind of dark humor, and it does sort of have that dark humor. I did not find the book funny though. So, a lot of people say like, oh, it was funny, even though it was dealing with a very heavy, very heavy topics, several heavy topics. But I think I didn't find it funny because I sort of related to what she went through, um, on some level. And I think if you relate to this book, if you've gone through something like this, the type of abuse that she suffered, it might not be funny. It might not come across as funny. And I felt the same way about the Selma Blair book, because she also was kind of funny and had this kind of humorous vibe. And I was like, I don't find this funny. I don't find the way that, their relationship with their mother, their relationships with their mothers was not funny to me, even though they sort of found the humor in it, which I think can be kind of healthy. So like I said, eating disorders can be chronic conditions. They are also classified as mental health issues. And, I myself kind of had a mild eating disorder. I don't think I would have met the criteria. I sort of learned, while reading this book, that there is a criteria for things like bulimia, anorexia. And reading through that criteria, I don't think I would have qualified as someone with an eating disorder, with anorexia or anything like that. But I did have some version of a mild eating disorder, which kind of, I don't want to say has carried on, but has sort of made my chronic illness, I think, that much more complex. She also had some OCD type issues. And after reading this book, I realized that I had similar issues as a kid. And again, we both have these very complicated, possibly abusive relationships with our mothers. And so it was really interesting to sort of see that we had certain things, certain little habits and things that we developed to cope with, the way that we were being treated. So, I guess the main takeaway from this book for me was my relationship with food, because she had pretty severe bulimia. I was not aware of how, I know that bulimia is really bad, but I think when it comes to anorexia and bulimia, we always kind of give anorexia more attention. I'm not sure, I guess because anorexia is more lethal, or it can kill you a lot faster than bulimia. But bulimia feels more like a chronic, well, they're both chronic conditions, but it feels more like a chronic illness because of the toll it takes on your body. Her teeth were falling out. I think her hair was even falling out, I believe. And of course the damage, to her stomach, to her, her throat, things like that. It's it's grossing me out, because I do have, I'm very sensitive, I'm very emetophobic. If you don't know what that is, look it up. I do have that issue. As a child, I developed that phobia probably out of anxiety because of issues that I was having at home with my parents. So I kind of stopped eating, and she describes in her book that she'd had anorexia first. It was something that her mom actually taught her. And then she developed bulimia after, and she developed bulimia, I think, after her mother died. I think. I think when her mother got sick again, because her mother had cancer when she was a kid, and then she relapsed several years later and got cancer again. And so, that, to me, I was not afraid of getting fat or anything like that. I was scared of eating. I was scared that I was, gonna throw up if I ate. And so I ate very little, or kind of just didn't really eat much. And it's anxiety. I've had anxiety since I was a kid. I actually think it may run in my family. There may be a genetic component to it. Obviously genetic, and obviously it's how that term that they use, which is generational trauma, which is kind of a blanket term. But those things have sort of been passed down. And I do believe both my parents as well as other people in the family have anxiety issues. And mine manifested that way. And Jeanette's manifested in a very similar way, where she, she wanted to control her body and keep her body from developing. So she stopped eating. And so I stopped eating and, had that weird phobia. And really, I kind of had to conquer it on my own because I wasn't really taken to a therapist. I think I was taken to a therapist once, and then that was it. And then I kind of had to deal with it on my own. But reading this book brought back a lot of that, right? It brought back a lot of those memories of me having that issue as a kid, my anxiety, also those little weird OCD habits that I developed. And I saw that it probably was a byproduct of, abuse and the way that I was being treated as a child. And, for her, the abuse was pretty severe. I mean, she didn't really see it that way. But as you're reading the book and you're seeing, kind of how her mom is, it's really pretty intense abuse. And so I guess like it started kind of bringing that kind of stuff back up with me, but it also, the whole food thing, not just the eating disorder, but just me and food and how I relate to food in general, kind of came at me out of nowhere. I didn't expect for that to come as a result of reading this book. She has to reevaluate her relationship with food in order to recover from her bulimia. She was bulimic for, I believe it was 5 years or more than that, and really severely. I won't get into it in detail because it grosses me out, but it was bad. And the way to kind of get out of that is to sort of reevaluate and sort of reform, I guess, your relationship with food. And that was what her therapist had to do with her. And it was, when I tell you it's a long journey, it reminds me a lot of chronic illness, how some of us do so many things to get better and to improve our health. And some things just don't work, or we give up, or we just can't do this anymore. And it was very similar with her. She dropped her first therapist because that therapist kind of told her mother was abusive, and she didn't want to hear that. She loved her mother. She worshiped her mother. She could not bear to hear that. But this disease was, it was destroying her little by little, much like a chronic illness does. It wears you down little by little over time. And so she had to, she got a different therapist and had to reevaluate her relationship with food. And that's something that I have been thinking about a lot since I read that book. And I've started to see that I have certain memories and certain things that, that lead me to believe that I just don't have a very good or very healthy relationship with food. And yes, I'm very thin. But you can be, and I discussed this in other videos. There's going to be a video on fat phobia that I made. It's two sides of the same coin. Being obese, being underweight, you have a dysfunctional relationship with food. My chronic illness sort of forced me to have a better relationship with food, and it actually facilitated that in a way because I have a very restricted diet and I have to eat very healthy, but also low inflammatory diet, low in sugar, no refined carbohydrates, like no pasta, things like that. So it can come across as sort of like an orthorexia type of thing, but my body literally does not tolerate lots of sugar, wheat, soy, anything like that. So I had to, just have this very basic restricted diet. And I think that almost kind of helped in a way because I don't have to think about what I'm eating. I know what I can eat and I just eat it. And it's typically things that are, generally healthy, like quinoa, vegetables, meat, chicken, things like that. But I did start, thinking about how did I think of food before I got sick? How did that evolve? And, you know, lots of different little things kept coming up. Somebody on Twitter recently posted this picture that he was making sandwiches to take to Disneyland. You know, because a lot of people make sandwiches and they take them to Disneyland. And I remember, you know, we used to do that in my family when we were kids. My mom would make sandwiches, you know, for us to eat at Disneyland. And I remember being very embarrassed by that. Like, we're so poor that we can't afford to buy food at Disneyland. And we have to make these sandwiches and take them into Disneyland. Like, it was just so embarrassing. And I have many examples like that. I would skip lunch at school because I didn't have money to get lunch from the snack shack. I had, you know, I had reduced lunch, so I had to go get the school lunch, which was like not cool. So I would just not eat unless I had money, my own money, to buy something from the snack shack. Those weird, you know, associations with food. But I also identified something because I thought to myself, what is it that that triggered all of this? There has to be a trigger. And for Jeanette, it was her mother actually teaching her to be anorexic. She taught her calorie restriction because Jeanette asked her, you know, how can I stop myself from developing? And her mother said, calorie restriction. So she literally taught her to be anorexic. And I'm thinking, you know, a lot of these things, and I've known other women, I've had friends who, you know, who have told me that their mothers have told them stuff like, you know, you're fat, you're gaining weight, like flat out just told them that they're fat and that they need to lose weight. And this seems to be kind of a mom thing. It's not so much a dad telling his daughter, although I'm sure that that happens, but it seems to be a mom and daughter type of situation. And I remember one of my earliest memories was I was sitting at the dinner table and everybody finished eating and I was full. So I still had food on my plate, but I was full and I didn't, you know, I wasn't going to eat anymore because I was full. And I was not allowed to get up until I finished everything on my plate. And I mean, it's a vague memory, but I know it's there and I'm sure it didn't happen just this one time, but I remember being there and seeing the sun go down and my mom was just not going to let me get up. And so, you know, and I remember feeling full, like I'm not hungry, you know, I can't eat because I don't want any more food. And that I actually have read now that I'm older, I have read that kind of, you know, forcing your kids to eat even after they're full leads to disordered eating. And as a matter of fact, I have spoken about this girl. She's a medical assistant at my doctor's office. She just got gastric bypass, and she says that that's what her parents would tell them, that, you know, that they need to clean their plate. They shouldn't be leaving food on their plate because there are other people that are less fortunate, and you have to eat everything on your plate. And so she said that's what happened, you know, except that she went the opposite direction that I went. I don't want to eat anymore because I didn't want to, you know, I was scared of throwing up, and she went the other way where she ate and eventually used that as a coping mechanism for her depression, for any issues that she was having. And I have lots of those memories, you know, to this day when I see large amounts of food, for example, mukbangs and stuff just really, really gross me out. And more recently, you know, in the last few weeks, my appetite has actually improved. It could be probably because of the exosomes. And again, I don't know if this is going to be a long-term improvement, but there have been episodes where I have felt very hungry. And I usually don't feel hunger very well or very clearly. I just know that I have to eat because it's been a few hours since I ate. And I've actually felt hungry, sometimes very hungry. And it's a foreign sensation. It's almost kind of scary because it's been a long time since I've had hunger like that, since I've actually felt like, man, I'm really hungry. And so that has also kind of come up recently, and it reminds me of all of this. It reminds me of my childhood and, my relationship with food and all of these things that have come up, and how I just, food has always been such an issue. Um, and now feeling hungry, I mean, it feels good to feel hungry, especially when you haven't felt hungry in a really long time. But then I'm thinking, oh my gosh, why am I feeling this hungry? Like, is there something wrong? Is there something wrong with me because I'm feeling so hungry? Or is this how problems start? Because I've never been overweight. And I think to myself, is this why people are overweight? Because they always feel like they're super hungry. But again, that could just be that, something is improving in my body. You know, and I'm now starting to feel, or starting to have an improved appetite because I'm, maybe inflammation is going down. I don't know. But, this book really, it sort of drives the point home that, if you have unresolved issues, even if you have a chronic illness, there are a lot of other factors, your relationship with food. How's your relationship with food? I think in a lot of cases, there are people who are, chronically ill, who have not paid attention to what they're eating and how that's contributing to their health. I've seen people in the Lyme community, other chronically ill people that are just eating whatever they want and they're sick. And it's like, I know that that's not a cure, but it's part, it's part of the issue. Putting into your body what is nourishing and good, and keeping out what can potentially be a problem. And that was one of the first things that my doctor did. She said, look, we're going to take away all sugar and no more refined carbohydrates because that's making you really sick. It's making a bad situation even worse. So, it's a very complicated journey, and I think I want to keep talking about this because it's something new. It's something that I'm also probably going to start addressing with my therapist, because there could be a lot of unresolved issues there. And now with my restricted diet, it almost complicates this journey that much more. So, like I said, I recommend the book. I think it's really good. But it is a very sensitive topic that not everybody is going to tolerate well. Like I said, I kind of barely got through the book because of some of the content in it, but it's worth reading, because those of us with a chronic illness, we don't just come to our chronic illness, free of issues. I think most of us come to our chronic conditions with pre-existing mental health issues, and even other physical things that we just never addressed. But anyways, yeah, it was a good read. I enjoyed it. But it brought up a lot of questions for me. And so I'm kind of going to explore that and hopefully come up with more content related to that. So thank you for joining me, and I